videos we learned that the French and Indian War was fought on multiple continents, and although Britain won, it left them with an empty treasury and mountains of debt. Before the American Revolution, Britain levied a number of taxes on the American colonies in an effort to raise revenue and pay for the expenses of the British Empire. Some of the most significant taxes imposed on the colonies included the following. The Sugar Act of 1764 imposed a tax on foreign sugar and molasses imported into the colonies, as well as a tax on other imported goods such as wine, silk, and indigo. The Sugar Act was intended to raise revenue for the British government and encourage colonists to purchase British-made goods. The Stamp Act of 1765 required that all legal documents, newspapers, and other printed materials in the colonies be produced on stamped paper that had to be purchased from the British government. The Stamp Act was deeply unpopular in the colonies, and it was met with widespread resistance and protests. The Stamp Act became very unpopular because of who it targeted. Since all printed paper had to have a stamp, this made life harder for newspaper publishers. Their costs went up. Another group that was targeted by the Stamp Act were lawyers, since their entire profession is dependent on filing paperwork. Lawyers began to speak out against the king's taxes. Printers published these opinions. Resistance to taxes began to grow. This could not occur in many other places in the world at the time. The colonies had a very high rate of literacy. This was a byproduct of being settled by Puritans and other Protestants. They had to know how to read so they could interpret the Bible. Colonists became a willing audience for these opinions. The Townshend Acts of 1767 imposed taxes on a number of imported goods, including glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. The Townshend Acts were also met with resistance in the colonies, and they helped to fuel growing discontent with British rule. The Tea Act of 1773, this act was designed to help the struggling British East India Company sell its surplus tea by allowing it to sell directly to consumers in the colonies. The Tea Act was opposed by many colonists, who saw it as an attempt to undermine the thriving colonial tea trade. The Boston Tea Party, a protest in which colonists boarded British ships and threw their cargo of tea overboard, was a response to the Tea Act. These taxes and acts were a major source of tension between the colonies and Britain and contributed to the growing sense of discontent that eventually led to the American Revolution. The colonists argued that they should not be taxed without representation in the British Parliament, which led to the colonial rallying cry, "No taxation without representation." This principle became one of the key rallying cries of the American Revolution and is still remembered today as an important principle of democracy. Check out our next video where we will explore other ways King George III angered the colonists in More Mistakes from King George.